like to start the session number 16. So we will first go with David Lüllemann on "I could never perceive Zionists as real people," that's a quote, antisemitism among different groups of refugees from the Middle East in Germany.
All right. So, thank you first of all, Alvin and Günther and Bethany and all the others who made this possible that I'm here. Anti-Semitism among Muslim immigrants in Germany became a topic of interest in the German society a little bit in the aftermath of the 2015 refugee crisis. But it was not until spring 2018 when there was once again an anti-Semitism debate, a smaller one, which for the first time indeed focused on the anti-Semitism among Muslim refugees and immigrants. Although there is a danger of externalizing the anti-Semitism problem as if it were alien to German society, it is important to monitor anti-Semitic and Israel hostile attitudes among refugees from the Middle East, as the counter such ideas is important regardless of the origin of people. Unfortunately, it has been instrumentalized by the AfD. I think Mark Grimm mentioned it briefly. The head of the Council of Jews in Germany, Joseph Schuster, uttered some fears regarding the refugees from Syria and Iraq because he said they were from countries where the hatred of Jews is a normal thing, and he was slammed by the left for his opinion. Already in November 2016, we, from the NGO project Witnesses of the Time Witnesses, launched a new sub-project under my guidance to counter modern anti-Semitism, and in the past year we've started to also monitor anti-Semitism among Muslim immigrants. Our aim was to interview refugees, mainly young ones, who came to Germany in the past 5 years from the main immigration countries in the Middle East: Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan and Iran. But with a reasonable knowledge of either English or German, just because we do not have language skills in our project that would cover Arabic, Pashtun and so on and so forth. We included female and non-Muslim refugees as well to gain a more diverse and perhaps balanced perspective. So the focus of the interviews, which last about an hour each, is more of a qualitative rather than a quantitative approach. Several interviews have been conducted since March 2017 by volunteers and by myself, who have been instructed carefully beforehand in towns such as Stuttgart, Hof, Hamburg, one in Dortmund. But unfortunately we were not able to conduct enough interviews in a sufficient quality to deliver what I planned to do. First of all, it has proven to be very difficult to actually find refugees, because not only was our group limited to English and German-speaking refugees, that group is not too small actually. But the administrations and those dealing with the refugees didn't want us to access the refugees. If you'd ask me for a personal opinion, either because of their laziness, which I don't believe that much, or due to actually political reasons. So we had some exceptions, usually from church-related charities actually, where we were able to access refugee homes and houses, not the homes, to conduct interviews. But we still had not enough, and so I joined our results with the results of Jessica Hösel, a scholar of Jewish studies at the Heidelberg Center of Jewish Studies. She wrote her 2017 master thesis about religious tolerance among young refugees who arrived in Germany. And one main focus of her interviews has been the tolerance towards Judaism. So altogether we have 13 interviews, which is absolutely not enough to have any generalizable results, but still we wanted to have 25. but still I think I can give you an impression of what we heard in these interviews. It still is about 13 hours of material, so it's not too few to extract something from it. The most surprising result we had, in my opinion, was that we found out that a lot of them did not actually share too much of traditional anti-Semitic patterns. Well, some of them said all Jews were rich, but not all of them. We found more weird ideas actually about the Shoah, and then when it comes to Israel. One thing that can be clearly seen in most of the interviews is a lack of knowledge about the past, about the Shoah. Out of 13 interviewees, only 1 or 2 have studied German history on the basis of facts. One female Muslim from Syria, 19 years old, told Jessica what she knew about the fate of the Jews. Just to sum it up, Hitler at first told the Russians to kill the Jews, but they fought back and killed the Russians together with Hitler because they were more efficient in their killings than the Germans. She added, "That's a well-known story in our country." It remains unclear whether she perhaps wanted to actively oppose the mainstream German version of this story, I mean the historically correct one, or whether she only was unaware of this historically correct version of the story. So her strange of the Shoah is a strange but massive reversal of perpetrator and victim, something we found 3 times. Günter Jeckeley, in his 2015 study on European Muslim anti-Semitism, found out that conspiracy theories about Shoah are only a minor phenomenon among young Muslim males in Europe in general. But I think in your 2017 study you found out that in Syria that's a more common thing. So it's a matter of perhaps even further research to find out whether conspiracy theories about the Shoah are a particular problem when it comes to Syrian and Iraqi refugees. One with a Kurdish background who was quite critical also admitted that he knows back home people who read Hitler's Mein Kampf, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and so on a voluntarily basis, and they actually believed what they read. The most problematic findings we had may be subsumed under the rubric Israel-related anti-Semitism and Israel hostility. Our most extreme example of anti-Semitic attitudes was a male Sunni refugee from Syria, 22 years old, from whom I've taken the quotation in the title of my talk, "I could never perceive Zionists as real people." Actually, he said mention which is humans as well. He has learned to speak German fluently within only 1.5 years, so he was quite an intelligent guy, we had the impression. And he even said that he wants to be tolerant towards everyone, irrespective of origin or religion. He told us he went to Buchenwald, where he, in his own words, mourned for the innocent Jews who were murdered there. The other side of the coin in his case was a very strong anti-Zionism. He demonized Zionists in an almost unbelievable way. Zionists are for Judaism just like what is ISIS for Islam. These comparisons were also found by Günther in his study. He conflated Jews and Zionists when he said we grew up learning that all Arabs have to become a unity and then need to expulse the Jews from Palestine to get back the land. When the interviewer asked him to name a difference between Jews and Zionists, he couldn't provide any reasonable distinctions except you can't see the difference. 2 topoi shared by about half of the interviewees were, first, the Jews have taken the Palestinian land, and secondly, the cruelty of either the Israeli army or of the Israelis in general. The latter one twice came up with the trope of Israelis as killing children. I will go over that. Most of those refugees sharing hatred against Israel, depicting them as child murderers, etc. On the other hand, considered themselves to be quite tolerant towards other religions. And actually they were, to some degree, people who actually were tolerant, visited churches and so on. If I were to sum that point up, I'd say to think of oneself as a tolerant person, also when it comes to Muslim and non-Muslim refugees, does not prevent one from being a very anti-Zionist, from using anti-Semitic tropes to describe the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Given the propaganda influences, a lot of them actually admitted. That seems to be true in particular for the refugees from Muslim countries. One last example to underline it a bit, a Kurdish refugee from Syria who shows a lot of respect for Judaism and is much in favor of Israel, still repeated a false story he heard about Israel's policy regarding the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They don't allow Muslim prayers to go there, or only 50 per day. He questioned most of the things he had heard about Israel and Syria, but obviously not everything. That shows that even someone who doesn't have an anti-Semitic attitude overall can still be ensnared in the traps of false and often stereotypically hostile tales about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Some of the refugees have shown a critical attitude towards the propaganda in their countries, especially Kurdish refugees. For example, one 25-year-old Maori Muslim with Kurdish roots and a comparably high education said that 75% of school lessons in political science were propaganda against Israel. Also, both Iranian interviewees spoke about the regime's indoctrination, and they were told at school that the brotherhood with the Palestinians was important, and to hate Israel and hate Zionists. And one indicated that this indoctrination would have been that obvious in Iran, that a lot of Iranians would think about it in a critical way. Whether that's true or not, I can't really say that. Whereas the other Iranians stated that open criticism of irrational hatred against Israel could have been punished, and therefore he had kept silent about it in his country of origin. So I'll just sum it up by going a bit more into the minorities we interviewed. We had several refugees who were parts of religious or ethnic minorities in their countries of origin, who recently converted in Germany, and they seem to show fewer anti-Semitic attitudes. Among these refugees, I could identify three groups. Of course, there are more. I'll just have these three now. Traditional Christian minorities in the Middle East. Mandaean and Catholic, for instance, both from Iran. And they were tolerant towards Judaism, but both shown an undifferentiated view of the Middle Eastern conflict. Second, people from the Kurdish minority from both Syria and Iraq. As mentioned above, they were usually not only tolerant towards Judaism, but even very positive about the existence of the State of Israel. Partially because they identified with this special country in the Middle East. Nevertheless, one of them lacked practically any substantial knowledge. And some of them were even overly self-identifying themselves with the State of Israel in a way that was close to philo-Semitism. So Kurdish people and Jewish people kind of even merged in the way they depicted their situations. I think that's also something Günther has found out in his research in 2017. Among the interviewees, there were also two former Muslims who converted to evangelical Christianity in Germany. One converted in Germany, one converted at home, and who seemed to be very interested in Christianity, were baptized and so on. The problem now is that they actually mix now Judaism with Israel and the Israelites from the Old Testament, which leads to some sort of very philo-Semitic view of the conflict in a Christian way. I wouldn't say that was anti-Semitic in the way they spoke about them, but they didn't really make any distinction between the Mosaic Israelites and nowadays Jewry. So that led also to some confusion. Already a study on refugees in Bavaria published by the Hans Seidel Foundation in April 2017 stated that anti-Semitism among refugees is partially dependent on their religious backgrounds. Also, Günther felt that out. More than half of the Muslim participants of their study agreed that Jews would have too much influence on a global scale, whereas less than a quarter of the Christian participants shared that position. This study was conducted among 779 refugees in Bavaria from Syria, Iraq, Eritrea, and Afghanistan. And as far as I'm aware, that's the largest study since 2015, and the only one that could be called quantitative, especially when it comes to refugees in Germany. There are a few earlier studies by Ruth Koopman, who did like a study about general European Muslim population in comparison to the general population in several European countries, but I think that study is from 2013 or something. And there is no really new study except from Günther's. What also seemed to be interesting, I think I'll close by that, is that the lack of knowledge about Judaism and Israel seemed to be a really big problem. A Kurdish refugee with only minor education who showed sympathy for Israel confused the term anti-Semitism. He indeed thought that this was a term to describe the attitude of being against hatred towards Judaism. So, so he thought he was himself an anti-Semite because he liked Jews. That indeed is a confusion. Several of the refugees said that they didn't have a lot of reliable information. They quite often quoted social media, especially Facebook, as a source of full knowledge about the Shoah and also Israel. There were examples in which, at least regarding the Shoah, their knowledge they got from Facebook was right. A few cases. And most, of course, were ensnared by the traps of false information you receive on the social media. So what needs to be done? I find it quite astonishing that most of the refugees whom we actually interviewed lamented themselves sometimes their lack of knowledge about Judaism, not all of them. At least for those cases, it should be comparably easy to provide, perhaps in the so-called Integrationskurse, in the integration classes, or in different settings, a class about the German past, about the Shoah, but also about nowadays Judaism, including the State of Israel. Well, not the State of Israel as part of Judaism, but the State of Israel regarding the wrong information they usually have about the conflict there. And to have a self-reflection about the anti-Zionist patterns they've often shown. I believe that education is key, although it will take a very, very long shot. We also should stand on the side of those among the Muslim immigrants who, like Ahmad Mansour, an Arab Israeli, strongly opposes all forms of anti-Semitism in parts of the Muslim community in Germany. Actually, these persons who fight against anti-Semitism among the Muslim communities, they are attacked by radical leftists in Germany, accusing him of supporting racism against immigrants from the Near and Middle East. That's definitely not a helpful thing to do. What definitely needs to be done, I think, is to deal with the yeah.
Nice way of putting it.
Yeah, sure, Philip, sure. What definitely needs to be done, I think, is to deal with the problem of a comparably widespread anti-Semitism and even more widespread anti-Zionism among a strong minority, or even a majority, I'd say, of the refugees. We should not make the fall to leave this problem to the rightist parties in Germany, the AfD, as a means of externalizing their own problems with anti-Semitism, just as Mark Grimm already mentioned it briefly. And the problem is that right now that is the case. The AfD is more or less the only party in Germany addressing the problem of anti-Semitism among refugees. And also Matthias Künzel a few days ago, when I talked to him, shared that opinion. I think there should be an interest for this topic also in the mainstream political parties in the German political spectrum, although I am not sure how we could undertake that operation to get the interest for that. I think I need to close, and I would like to thank you for your patience.